Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second discussion with Mark Paulson from the Langcat, where we'll be going through some of the findings from our Adviser Barometer in a bit more detail. And just some housekeeping before we, get into all the good detail. First and foremost, if you have any technical difficulty on, while on the webinar, if you could refer to the help guide in Zoom. Or alternatively, if you could exit and re-enter, that should hopefully solve the problem. If you want to ask questions throughout, please do so using the icon at the bottom of the screen. And then lastly, we are certifying the webinar for CPD. So you'll receive that certificate after the fact. And also, but obviously only, for the time that you've actually been logged in on. Good, and now I'd like to welcome Mark. There we go, welcome Mark.
Good to see you, Daniel.
Yes, always a pleasure to chat to you. How are things?
Very well, thank you, very well. I'm sheltering in a hotel room in London at the moment. It's baking hot outside, height of summer here.
Yes, no, I can believe. We've, in Cape Town, our weather's but not quite the same, but we have the better rub of the green for the most of the year, I suppose. So
I think you do.
Can't complain.
I think you do.
Good. And Mark, if you could please, I think most of the people listening in hopefully did watch the first webinar with yourself and Taryn, but if you could please just give a brief intro again
Sure.
to yourself, to the Langcat business, and then ultimately how you worked, started working with Allan Gray on the Adviser Barometer.
Sure. Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to those of you that are back for a second go, and thank you very much. I'm Mark Paulson, and I run a business out of Edinburgh in Scotland called the Langcat. We're financial industry researchers and consultants. We do a bunch of other things as well, but they needn't bother us today. And I guess we're particularly known for spending a lot of time trying to understand the pressures, the attitudes, the sentiment of the advice profession in the UK and elsewhere. We publish every year what is now, I'm pretty sure, the biggest independent survey of UK advice professionals, which we call State of the Advice Nation. And I think it was that research report that drew us to your attention, Daniel, or at least yours collectively,
Yeah.
Allan Gray, with the idea of perhaps looking at how advice professionals in South Africa are viewing some of the core issues that really advisors all over the world are facing. And I know we'll get into it, but even just before we start, the commonality of what advisors, power planners, admins, people that work in advice businesses have to deal with from territory to territory, from Australia to SA to Western Europe, UK, America. There's so much. It's really a kind of globalized profession now. It was so interesting to have a chance to look inside the South African market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we also took a lot of insight from the report, and I guess what we're here to do today, of course, is to unpack some of that in a bit more detail, including I think some of the findings that we included in the survey, which you conducted with I think towards 600 respondents that ended up responding. But maybe didn't make the report also. So I think what people watching here will see is some additional snippets of info which hopefully are useful for them.
Definitely, it was a big survey, and it was nearly 600 people, all of whom deserve plaudits and possibly cake of some kind, because it was quite a big survey. And as always, you can't publish everything. So this is lovely because we're going to get to chat through some of those extra parts.
Absolutely, yeah. And then also just I guess to keep in mind, the first webinar with Taryn was very much focused. The way we decided to structure it was to focus that webinar on the client, the end-to-end advice process. And really what we're planning to do here now is shift focus into the business side of things. So insights that are hopefully useful to advisors and others that are involved in the running of advice businesses. So that's the plan. Before we get into the actual detail on that, though, I thought what would be nice is to set the scene with a couple of maybe non-business related items, but items which I think provide a nice backdrop for the discussion. So So maybe we can pull up that the couple of slides first on that and then speak through those. So the first one I wanted to share is this one, which is a word cloud. And effectively, Mark, you'll recall what you did is asked all the respondents effectively if there was one word that you could pick that would sum up the advice profession, as it stands today, what would that be? And you can see the words over there. So, and this was interesting to me. I think, the words challenging and compliance, you can see obviously some of the bigger ones, some of the ones that came up more often. So clearly challenges, but at the same time, I think a lot of maybe more than a fair sort of sprinkling of optimism in those responses too. So, and I think as I actually looked at this in a bit more detail, I think what you see sort of just a different, especially when it comes to the positive words, a different vocabulary. So I saw, my son's favorite response to most things I ask, good, in here, for one. And then you see people using some more exotic language, exceptional, excellent, etc. So, that's what I took from looking at this is yes, challenges, yes, compliance, regulatory burden, but also positivity. And I think that also reflected in some of the questions and the answers to the questions in the barometer on revenue and revenue projections, where there was definitely some optimism. So I don't know what your views are on that. Is there anything here that struck you as unique to South Africa, or very much, as you say, sort of reflective of the industry globally?
Lots of commonalities with what we would see from UK advisors and those from elsewhere. I thought that kind of note of positivity you talked about there, Daniel, was really notable, actually. So yes, it's challenging, but you know what? We're dealing with people's futures here. It should be challenging, right? If it was that easy, they wouldn't need advisors. So I don't think challenging is necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Challenges can bring rewards. It's interesting doing what advisors do. Universal moans, doesn't matter where you do this kind of work, universal moans about compliance and regulation. Nobody likes compliance and regulation. To be honest, most compliance officers and regulators don't like compliance and regulation, but we have it anyway because people have to be safe. So I think you almost discount that. That's just a moan. It's the same everywhere. But if we do discount that here, we see, you can see the word cloud, things like opportunity, improving, evolving, exciting. Exciting, I thought was a really interesting thing to say, and because it's such a big word in terms of font size here on the slide, that means it came up a few times, right? And I thought overall, the note of kind of optimism and positivity that we got from respondents in South Africa was A, really great to hear, and B, certainly I think more positive than we might see in UK at the moment, certainly in Australia, and probably on a par with another famously bullish market like the US.
Absolutely. I also just, as I was going through that word cloud, I also noted the word exiting, which I'm hoping that the C was missed and that the exciting should actually have been bigger. That's how I'm going to take that. But anyway,
let's go with that.
Yeah, let's go with that. And then the other slide, maybe if I can just pull up the next one on which I think really frames today's discussion very nicely, is this question that was asked was, when you think ahead for your business for the next 2 years, what are the 3 key things that you want to focus on as a business? And I thought this was really interesting. So as you can see there, top of the pile, we had organic client growth. So growth, businesses want to grow, but not necessarily via acquisition, although I know that's part of the puzzle for many businesses. And then number 2, very much a focus on your client base. So are we as a business doing business with the right sort of client and client segments? And then 3, very much a focus on operations, tech, security, regulation, how to handle that. So I thought that was interesting, because really I think those are the areas that we want to get into today, is the actual running of the business. And then obviously you can see, as things go, things taper off. But if we can get through those top 3 in a good amount of detail today, and then leave the audience with some good, interesting, and practical insight in those areas, I think that'll be a job well done. So that's the aim. And let's do that. I think how I decided to structure that for the rest of the webinar was around business structure. So let's start talking a little bit about the business structure, the staffing, and just how businesses are setting themselves up. And then from there, what we'll do is we'll go into the revenue side of the equation, or the income statement. So basically looking at revenue levels, fee structures, fee models, etc. And then lastly, I want to spend some time on technology. I think it's important in any discussion around business operations and efficiency. You can't do it justice without focusing on technology. So let's get into a couple of interesting views on business structure. So what we've got on this first one is, obviously we asked for some feedback in the survey or on number of staff in the business, but different types of staff. So advisors, non-advisors, and then also some further detail there. And then also we obviously got feedback on the size of the business. So what this chart reflects is it reflects the staff and advisor numbers, which is the blue line, and then the yellow, which is other, on average for businesses of different sizes that responded. And as you can see, I think on the left-hand side for a business with 100 million rand in investment assets, you can see there either 1 or 2 advisors and then 1 or 2 support staff. So that that's probably not a surprise. And then you can see the lines actually sort of map in quite the sort of a equal line. So the gradient's the same. And then once you get to around that 1 billion investment book size, you can see the lines start to deviate. And actually then what you end up with is more non-advisor staff in proportion to advisor staff. And I guess that's what I'm inferring from that is that's probably the time when the need for more specialist staff within a business, starts to come into play, whether that's in-house compliance or whether it's, your IT specialists and the like. So that was what I took from that. The other thing I took from this graph is that the lines keep on going up. So actually, it's not a given that as you grow your investment book, it scales particularly well. You need to continue hiring people to make that work. So that was the other piece that I saw. And then of course, people are a big part of any financial business's cost base. So I don't know what you took from this. Does that line up with what you see in the UK? Did anything here surprise you?
It mainly lines up, yes. But I think that would be not just in financial markets. I think that would be across any kind of professional services. Mm-hmm. I'm sure we'll talk about AI a little bit later and the the potential efficiencies and all that kind of stuff. But right now it's people business. So in the UK market, for example, being the one that we've done a similar study on most recently, you would see roughly 1-to-1 advice and non-advice, which could be paraplanning, ops, admin, up until about 100 million sterling. And then the lines start to diverge a little bit, beg your pardon. And yes, they track up together. There is it spreads out a little bit differently, but the pattern is broadly the same. That scalability point is so crucial, by the way, because there are relatively few businesses in the UK, and I'd argue across all the kind of relevant markets that have similar kind of developed market profiles. You don't see many businesses that are really, really set to operate, scale, and generate major efficiencies. And we might dig into why that is in a moment. But there are a few, some interesting ones out there, but they've set themselves to do that from the get-go. Yeah. Whereas a typical financial planning practice, which grows because they're good at what they do, or they get lucky, or whatever it might be, they're not really set for it. And so, you never get that kind of hockey stick kind of curve that you get in technology markets, where, it all goes great and then you sell for billions of dollars or whatever, and then are found on a yacht somewhere. It's hard to do that.
No, absolutely. And actually, I would have going to raise this because we're going to go through numbers sort of throughout the session. And when you say 100 US or 100 sort of pounds, I think that's actually very similar in purchasing power terms to $1 billion in rand. Obviously, if you just do a direct conversion, that's not true. So my maths is fortunately not as bad as that. But once you account for purchasing power, I think that's actually a very similar, point at which those lines start to diverge. So that is interesting. So seemingly at a very different, very similar place. And then if I can just go back to the next slide on that point, I think it's related, but I guess what it translates into is something like this, right? So this is the type of metric when we think about operations and scale that we would look at for our own business, and scrutinize quite a bit, is sort of your number of clients or your number of investment accounts per member of staff. And I think the same should hold in another business model and in advice businesses in particular. And I think this is just another way of looking at the same picture, where you're basically saying your number of clients per staff member doesn't necessarily scale either. And you can see that. So I think sort of, if you look at where the average sits, around 100 from the outset, which shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, because if you're saying that, you've got towards 200 clients per advisor and a 1-to-1 ratio on sort of advisor to non-advisor staff, that's sort of where you're at. But then you can see the bigger the businesses go, actually, if anything, there's a slightly downward trend line there. So I think that just backs up the same point really around, and I think the key for me, and maybe we can move on to that now, is you mentioned that certain businesses are getting it right, and maybe we can set technology aside for now, because we're going to come back to that in detail. But outside of technology, I'd be really interested to know, what are the things in your view that those specific data points are getting right? You mentioned obviously now starting from the outset and setting up that way, but are there any practical data points that you think are key for any businesses that are looking to scale, but probably having experienced some of what we've now shown on these two charts?
Yeah, I think there are. I will get into that, but I'm going to be naughty for a moment and just go to the side. One of the things that we find in the UK is that there is a slightly different profile to this, but there's a reason for it. I just want to mention it because a lot of the larger firms in the UK have very, very different structures, and they're much older. And so they have huge back books of clients who are not being regularly serviced, which is a fundamental issue in our market, much as it was in Australia, where they had the Royal Commission, or the fee for no service, as it was called, review. So we see in our market, as you grow, the number of clients per advisor does increase, but that's the wrong metric to use in our market. Okay. And the reason for that is we need to look at the number of active clients per advisor, and that does stay steady. Okay. And that so we're in a kind of capacity that one human being can do here. So just in case anybody's read some stuff from the UK and is going, hang on, that's not the case over there, you're right. But it's because we're looking at sometimes looking at slightly different things. Going back to your question, Daniel, about the characteristics, I'll be a little reductive here, but I think there are a few. The first is that face-to-face is a luxury. It can happen in those properly scalable businesses, but overwhelmingly, they will be remote. That's hard for a lot of financial planners to get next to, because I'm sure we've all sat through presentations and conferences and all the rest of it, where we need to see the whites of the eyes and pick up the body language cues to know about vulnerability, for example. All kinds of things like that are really important. Nonetheless, some of those businesses that are achieving those much higher productivity numbers have basically said, do you know what, we can live with that. And they are now remote. The number of appointments per week that an advisor, right, not all the people surrounding the advisor, but the advisor can do, is far higher. Multiple appointments a day.
Interesting.
Technology does come into it very quickly after that, because you've got to be able to deal with the outputs of those meetings. We will come back to that, but multiple appointments per day, split between firsts and seconds. Any environment that works like that, and there are a couple of, I think it's probably okay to mention these names. I'm saying good things about them. A couple of firms in the UK, if people are interested and want to research, there's one particular one called Wealth at Work. another company called True Potential, both of whom have developed remote-based services. And the key thing there is that advisors just give advice. Okay. That's what they do. Lead generation is sorted for them for the most part. Admin is sorted for them for the most part. They've got to get their notes in good order and stuff, but still. Paraplanning, report writing is sorted for them. Tax and trusts work is sorted for them. So they are there to have extraordinary conversations with individuals, then put the phone down, 20 minutes to get their thoughts together or get themselves sorted out, on to the next one. So it's a production line.
Okay.
And so it's a very, very different kind of model. But unless you allow that degree of specialization, and that's what I was saying, like it tends to be these bigger businesses that have set themselves to try and do this from the start. Unless you approach it in that way, it's very, very hard to pivot out of a traditional face-to-face relationship into that kind of world. So you'll often see firms that really want to go at that, they'll set up a greenfield business, as a wholly owned subsidiary or something like that, so that they can have a crack at it. But certainly in the UK market, businesses that work that way, most financial planners that I know would recoil in horror. They just wouldn't want to work that way. But to really, really scale, other than just hiring loads of advisors and loads of admins, and you get a big number, but your cost base just goes up all the time as well. That's what it takes. So it's kind of thinking the unthinkable is the thing you have to do. There's a saying that when you want to get somewhere extraordinary, the first thing you have to compromise is everything. And I think that might be true to build a properly scalable financial planning business.
Yeah. And out of interest, what would well-run business which has managed to scale to some extent, operating efficiently, just margin-wise in the UK, sort of operating margin-wise, like what range what's the target, I suppose, when thinking about it that way?
That's great. Great question. Across the market, I think everything kind of returns to the kind of median at some point, and for professional services generally, you're looking to try and get a 20 to 30% margin. And I think people have kind of learned over time that if you're much under 20%, then you're a little bit fragile. So you try and bump that up if you can. Much over 30%, somebody will come and give you a haircut at some point. You're not going to sustain that for very long. For these larger businesses, though, I'd like to strip out exceptional expenditure for them, because oftentimes they'll have large technology programs or similar, which will, hit the P&L. But broadly speaking, I would see them to the upper end of that range and maybe slightly better.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that, other than tech doing some of the heavy lifting, is that one non-fee earner will be supporting multiple fee earners. So I've seen over the years in various different markets. I mean, I know I look young, but I'm not. I've seen experiments with people trying to work with maybe 4 support staff to 1 advisor, just turning the whole thing right on its head. And actually, the act of giving advice becomes a very, very small part of the relationship there. So it's a completely different way of looking at it. I've seen some of that in Australia, actually. Similarly, I've seen people trying to get to anything to 1 to 4 or 1 to 6 even.
Sure.
And that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And it's probably not quite right, because if that one person goes off sick, then you're so stretched.
Yeah.
So that your resilience isn't that great. So, if you can operate at kind of 1 to 3, 1 to 4, non-fee earner to fee earner, and that doesn't have to be bodies, that it could just be expenditure. Then that's probably where you want to try and get to at that more scalable end.
Okay, good. That's very interesting. And then just on to our next graphic. So if I can move on to that. So I thought this was interesting. In the report itself, I think we spoke, quite a bit to the number of clients per advisor. Both obviously, the number of clients were provided, so you could work out the actual Then I think we asked the ideal and then the maximum. I've just sort of used the ideal here. And I think what was notable when splitting it out in this way was that I think the average in the report, if I recall, was around 150-ish. But actually, your sort of highest response number was very much around the 100 mark. So the largest number of respondents said that the ideal number of clients, that as an advisor they would want to be advising is in and around 100. So really a case of that average being skewed up because of some bigger numbers. What is your view on what obtainable and sustainable number is here? Because and maybe I'd sort of, what would be interesting is for the in-person advice model, maybe the more traditional model that many are accustomed with, but then also that remote model that you sort of spoke to a little bit. How would that compare, and what's the aim?
Yeah, so I love this bit in the barometer, partly because when we said if you could fix the industry issues, things like fragmentation and regulation and all that kind of stuff that stop you taking on more clients, where would you get to? And it taught us a couple of things. First of all, that admin staff and advice staff at the same kind of ceiling. So we were seeing that one-to-one relationship on the way through. I know I don't think that's on that particular slide, but it was an interesting finding nonetheless. The second thing is we've done a very similar study in the UK, and your numbers were way higher. South African advisors are just way more efficient, and also better looking, taller, and more fun. There was a genuine difference actually between what UK advisors thought their maximum would be and what South African advisors thought it would be. So in that face-to-face model, I think when we're really serious about it, it's something. It's not 20 and it's not 200. It's somewhere in 80 to 120, something like that. The problem is here that looking at it in a kind of how many appointments a week have you got to do kind of thing. So you're going to do one review a year, maybe 2 reviews a year at most with a client. So there's plenty of weeks, right? We've got 52 of them. That's only 1 or 2 a week, and that's fine. Except it's not, is it? Because clients are, don't mean to give fame away, but they're human beings and they'll do all sorts of things at any given moment in time. Then you've got hot moments in the markets where you have to speak to people and all that kind of stuff. If your stretch capability is only this much more than you can cope with, and you're going to be up till 3 a.m. and half dead, well, you won't be able to bring of yourself properly to those client meetings, and those clients are paying for it, and they need to have that. So I think holding it somewhere in and around that 100 mark feels about right. And the reason for that isn't that you couldn't do 150 if everything went tickety-boo and like clockwork. It's that if things went wrong, your ability to deal with it would be severely compromised. And one of the great things that sat inside the barometer, and that we do see in other markets too, is a real fundamental understanding and focus that the well-being of the client and being there for your client is absolutely crucial. And as I say, it doesn't necessarily jump out in graphs and stuff. But I assure anybody watching this, in the vox pops and everything, you would be proud of what people said. It was really good. And I see hints of that in here. Now, make it remote, where we're doing, a relatively cookie cutter approach. We're not driving 3 hours to go and see our client wherever they may be, and worrying about all the logistics that go with that. The number shoots up very quickly. Very quickly. There's still a ceiling, but it gets towards 180, 200. It's nearly double.
Okay. And clients are receptive to that, Mark, because I still think in our market, in my limited experience at least, there's very much still a premium put to in-person advice, building that relationship in person, seeing each other in person. So it sounds like in the UK we're starting to, potentially break through that a little bit, or not?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
I think a little bit. It's horses for courses, as we would say. It's a big enough market to allow people to work in the way they want to work. For everybody that really wants to sit with, Mark, the advisor, and, I come in and drink your coffee and eat your biscuits. There's other people who recoil in horror at the thought, especially the biscuits. But, it's common to see it as generational. So, I'm a Gen Xer, so Gen X coming through, I would be very happy to get advice remotely. I might like to see somebody sometimes if it's not really important going on. But, if we're checking in or whatever, then that'd be completely fine. And I think that does work for lots of people. There are times at which face-to-face, I think, is absolutely crucial. There are really kind of core life events where having that kind of quality of discussion is really important. So clients can self-select. Yes, I think people are getting into making remote work. Certainly with, let's say, working age clients, as opposed to those who are already in income drawdown or decumulation. I think that's certainly true. I have a great story. Hopefully we'll have time for it, and I guess I'll know, well, when I watch this back, I'll know if we didn't have time for it because I'll cut it out. But a guy I know who, a great character of a guy who used to work in the advertising industry and work with a lot of financial services brands. He was contacted once by his advisor, and we just had RDR in the UK, where fees had to change, commission was removed, and I imagine many people listening to this know all about RDR. You've been preached at it by UK people before. And the advisor said, well, listen, mister, I won't say his name, but sir, I'm afraid our fees have to go up as a result of this major change, and things are going to be a little different. But the great news is that you are in our most valuable client segment. And whereas we could only see you once a year before, we are now going to be able to see you 4 times a year because you are in our most valuable client segment. And my friend who was a very busy chap was like, no, you don't get it. You don't understand. I'm outsourcing my financial life to you. I'll pay more to see you less. How much is it for no appointments at all? If I never see you, unless something's wrong. That's what I want. And the point of the story isn't that people don't want to be seen. It is that we should be very careful about ascribing value before asking. Because clients do change and they do want different things, and Zoom is fine for some things and not for others, and so on and so on and so on. So other than those quite specialist businesses that I've talked about who set themselves up to be remote from the very start, the best kind of practice that I've seen is no sacred cows. Yeah. So we have the tools at our disposal. I don't think anybody would be watching this that doesn't have Teams or Zoom or obviously you've got Zoom if you're watching the webinar. It's a kind of daft thing to say, but you're all going to have that baked into your business somewhere. And so knowing how to use it, that is a skill set in itself, ensuring that you're in the right kind of place. You can be heard, you can be seen, understanding how to have these kinds of business conversations doesn't come naturally to everyone. So the work that has to be put in then sets you up to be flexible, and that over the piece probably does allow a little bit more efficiency. And I think lots and lots of firms are starting to see that, but it's a gradual thing. We're always looking for these cliff edges, not shelf edges. Here where it's an inflection point and now you're efficient or now you're not, it almost never works like that. It's too complex. Human beings are too complex. So we get these gradual improvements in efficiency as we learn to mix the different styles. Great.
Before we get stuck into fee models and fee structures, because I think that's interesting, I just wanted to put up one more slide, and I think if you look at this one, you'll recall back to the first slide. I think second in the list for focus areas was scrutinizing the existing client base. So I thought this finding was very pertinent, with that in mind. So effectively, what you did in the survey was say, if a client with R500,000 or more was to approach you to invest, what would you do? And what I thought, and I suppose for UK purposes, we can, roughly just drop a zero on that for pounds. So maybe that's sort of roughly the equivalent of £50,000 in purchasing power terms. What I found fascinating about this is not a particularly affluent client in our market, and yet as much as people are saying they're scrutinizing the client base, in the same time, the large majority would advise this segment of the market, which was interesting to me. I suspect it looks different in the UK, but I'm going to get your views on that now. And then, as you can see, when we then went further and said, well, how are you achieving that? There's the lighter touch offering that, at the top of the list. I think we've spoken a lot now around virtual meetings and the like. And then obviously another sort of strategy there is to use other revenue lines. So, insurance or medical aid or life cover and the like to supplement overall revenues. The other bucket was also interesting because, when you look at the comments there, really the large majority have quite an altruistic mindset. They're effectively saying, well, even if I might not be able to advise this client profitably, I see it as part of a bigger business and a bigger client base, and I apply my same offering and offer to all clients, including these. Like I said, my guess is the UK has a bit of a different picture, but I'm interested to hear where we are on that. Of course, much has been said about the advice gap and the like. So where are we here? And maybe aside from the virtual piece, which we have spoken about a lot, are there any other snippets of sort of insight that would be useful for advisors crafting these propositions for this segment of the market?
Yes. So first of all, I think the altruism that was evident here is A, great, and B, unsurprising, but C, very challenging as well, because I don't know what it is about advisors, right? There's something in you all, I don't know what it is, but you see yourselves almost as engines of social policy, of trying to improve the overall financial health of the country that you work in. Whereas what you're actually doing is running businesses, and there is a kind of hardness that eventually has to come with that, which can make these things challenging. Commission, other products, sometimes where remuneration is available at a level which doesn't completely reflect the affluence of that client, that can bridge the gap. In our market in the UK, that's all been taken away pretty much now. So that's much harder to do, and advisors have become a bit more hard-nosed in our market. But in SA, it was a little bit more, maybe where we were a little while ago, but not in a bad way. I thought it was lovely. It's what I call the Hard Rock Cafe model, which is love all, serve all. And what's not to like about that? The problem is eventually, if your capacity is constrained, it fills up with the lower value clients because there's more of them. And so you reach these kind of capacity issues, which are a little harder. In our market, some firms, quite a few, will have gate kind of propositions that says, look, we're really only suitable for people with £250,000 or more to invest. Others will make that very, very clear without saying an asset number by having quoted initial fees. I know we're going to get onto fees in a moment, so I won't spend too long on it, but they'll make it look unaffordable for people with smaller portfolios. So that's a kind of self-qualifying gate that people have to come through. But for those who do manage to bring in these kind of clients and to make a go of it, I think there are probably two key things. The first is, if you're fortunate enough to have multiple advisors in your business, it's likely that younger clients or those with more modest portfolios will have simpler affairs. Not all the time. Individuals can have complex things happen at any time, of course, but for the most part, what a wonderful place, therefore, for more recently qualified advisors to cut their teeth. They earn a little less. When you average everything out, it maybe doesn't look so good, but if you look kind of the costs of running a younger advisor or a less qualified advisor, maybe one who's a career changer or something like that, that can work really well. And I've seen that, be very successful actually. And then those advisors sometimes grow with those clients over time. So as those clients become more affluent in themselves, perhaps, the relationship can grow and change over time. The second is a more attitudinal thing. And I think this is a flaw in lots and lots of advice businesses in lots and lots of places. And that is an absolute refusal to consider the lifetime value of the customer. We're working in a world here where the potential relationship period might be 30 or 40 years. And we don't know what's going to happen in those 30, 40 years. Now, there are costs of compliance, there are costs of regulation, there are all the things that go with that. But there's so many businesses who are like, well, I just can't deal with those clients. They're not profitable. Yeah, they're not profitable now. But what does the future revenue stream of your business look like? Is it just more and more and more clients? Or can you build resilience in to allow these clients to come through? You've got them in, you've acquired them when it's probably cheaper to acquire them. There's less competition to acquire those clients because fewer people want them. So there are other ways of looking at this. And if we were a big bank or something like that, rather than a small advice business listening to this, we might be thinking about having a highly diversified client base in order to pick up on all sorts of different themes. And so I think firms that are managing to see their way to make this work have developed, maybe it's not on paper or on a PowerPoint slide, but they've developed an intuitive understanding that a longer term outlook can pay dividends if you also have a longer term outlook. If you're a short termer, if you want to sell and get out in the next few years, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think those are the two things.
Good. Fantastic. Well, let's get on to fees then. I think it's a good enough segue into that. So if we can pull up those slides again and then move on to fees and the revenue models. So I'm going to go through a couple first and then come back with some questions. So this first one is, was a view of ongoing advice fees charged by the respondents. So the ongoing percentage of asset based, and you can see there a lot of anchoring to the 0.5% ongoing, almost half of respondents, and then 1 in 5 at the 0. And it's not actually 0.7. That's the rounding. It's 0.75. Often our minds often work in 25% increments, I think. So anchoring there, and then sort of some at 1. And the like. This aligns quite well with our platform data, in fact, very well. So this is these responses, if you go and pull data from our platform and look at the weighted and the average across sort of different fee levels, it'll look very similar to this. The one thing that does strike me about this, though, is that I think for many advice businesses, break even, and in terms of their cost base, is often around 0.5%. So while individuals working there and the owners can live, make a good living out of it, in terms of what's left in the value of the business, in terms of the bottom line, may not be all that much at those fee levels. And then if we start looking into the structure, so I think I'll just go through all of these and then we can come back. But if you start looking at the structure, I think this was one of the obvious findings. Is still a predominant reliance on ongoing percentage of asset fees in the market. And then you can see obviously it steps down, about 40% now using initial asset-based fees, and not all that much more than 10% that have ventured into hourly consulting, fixed monthly fees, charging upfront for a plan, and the like. So I think what I'd want to, I think we've spoken before about do advisors in South Africa just undercharge? Is that true? I mean, I'm interested to get your insight on that. Or is it where the supply and demand curve in our in the South African market meets? Is that what it is? And then also, I think if you could move on from that to the actual structure of the fee. I think in the report, in the barometer, you referenced a 2/3, 1/3 split as almost best practice in the UK. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that in terms of.
Yeah, so gosh, lots and lots inside that for a start. So 0.5 internationally is a really common figure to be bandied around. The closer a sector is to a world in which commission was paid for inside the product for investment products, the closer to 0.5 you get. The further away from that you go, the closer to 1% you get. And so what does that indicate? Well, it indicates a sort of understanding that as you move into these more transparent, unbundled kind of environments, regulatory environments, costs do go up and charges go up as well for those who are closest to the client. And this is completely crucial here. So by the standard of some notable other markets, I would say those that are hanging in and around the 0.5, you guys are delivering exceptional value to your clients, assuming you're good at what you do, which I'm sure you are, and you certainly have headroom. Not just in international standards, actually, from what we see in SA as well, there is room to move up. The immediate strike back against that is, well, my clients won't stand for it. And that's a really interesting one, because if we look at what clients truly value, almost always, everybody knows the old Cerulli study from Oz that says, advisors spend all their time over here on admin, but what clients really value is in, support and emotional support and coaching and all the stuff that goes with financial planning. They don't want to lose it. So nobody likes paying more, but the fear of loss of that service is much greater. And so well-handled exercises to increase fees can actually work absolutely fine. It takes quite a lot of bravery to do, and not every client will go with you, but it can be done, and it has been done. I've been involved in those exercises personally, and I've seen what's happened, and I can see them work. So if you're charging 0.5, don't be shy. You can probably get up high. In UK market, just because I've got stats to hand, the kind of weighted average is somewhere in the high 70s. So probably about 0.78, something like that. It drifts around there over the years. It has been remarkably sustainable. And that's something that I think should give advisors heart who are watching this or reading the barometer, is that the price compression, margin compression is a different thing, but headline price compression in a financial planning environment hits you last. Sorry, Daniel, but platforms and investment providers and everyone else, you feel the pain before the advisors do. And that's, that's basic economics, right? Those closest to the client should be able to defend their price for the longest. And I think that's true. So we, internationally, we do see those 25 basis point clusters, 50, 75, 100. And we had a really interesting regulatory intervention in the UK not all that long ago, where the regulator, and I'll paraphrase here, said, lads, come on, what is it about 75 basis points you like so much? Because the herding, we've talked about clustering, herding is another way of saying it, safety in numbers. And in our market, it's dramatic. It's really dramatic. What is it about that makes you think it's right? And the answer is generally because we can do it and clients don't seem to mind, and it gives us enough money to operate, profitably, which we need to do. I think that's probably fine. What we do see though, and not on this slide, is that the overall total cost of ownership of clients, for clients, I beg your pardon, has remained or the same or drifted down since RDR. It spiked up as the market unbundled and everybody tried to up their charges a little bit, all very normal commercial stuff. And then it's kind of drifted down, settled down over the last 10 years or so. Total cost of ownership is not a million miles different from SA. It's a bit lower in the UK, but advisors are charging a bit more. So what we saw, I don't know if we've got this graph to share, Daniel. I'm not sure we do today, but if we look at the total kind of fee burden for a client in SA, just slightly over half of it rests with the cost of advice and financial planning and the service that people watching this give. In the UK, that's higher.
Okay.
So these are all just ways of hopefully helping people to understand that, looking to your cousins in other environments, there is certainly room up around the 0.75, 0.8 mark. 1% I think is a lot. There are lots of people who successfully charge that and whose clients are routinely delighted with what they do. It's relatively unusual to see somebody successfully really charging 1% across their book. Yeah. Another little factoid in here, anybody that does research for a living soon learns that the response that people give is only part of the story. There'll be other things that they don't talk about. Discounting behaviors are very interesting in this market. So client with, I don't know, I'll make it UK just to stop me getting figures wrong, but a client with £1 million walks in, do you charge them 0.75% a year? How much more work is there for that client than for somebody with £500,000? Yeah. Probably not that much more.
No, we see some of that in our market too.
So we see the tiering and discounting. So I've seen books where we've gone in and done a bit of work for the firm themselves, where they'll say, listen, we charge 0.75%. Yeah, but the blended charge that they're on is under 0.5. And it's not just because of tiering, it's because Daniel van Andel pushed back and wasn't happy paying what he was paying, and rather than have a fight, they were like, oh, okay, we'll do it for 0.5, or oh, okay, we'll do it for 0.3. So lots and lots of color inside that. In terms of structure, you correctly mentioned the 2/3, 1/3. Obviously, really basic rule of thumb, but that's just about trying to make sure, as a business, that your revenue base isn't completely asset dependent.
Can I?
So that if, sorry, please.
Sorry, Mark. No, I want to ask you on that. So I'm going to just go to the next slide, because I think what I'm interested in, and I found these numbers really interesting. So maybe we can dig in here. So effectively, what we've got is, the different, for those respondents, those that do apply these different fee structures other than the ongoing model, asset-based model, and then I've just, we've stacked them obviously from 0 to 100, and then we've taken the percentile. So I mean, the way to read this is that, the midpoint client that charges an hourly consultation fee charges 1,500 Rand an hour. And then if we go to the collation of a plan, it looks like the upper end of charging for an upfront plan would be in that sort of 50 to 60,000 Rand mark upfront. I'm interested to know of the third, because I think in our market, as we've seen in the other answers, we still, despite advisors, some advisors introducing these types of fees into their models, we still sit in a space where 90% is due to the asset-based ongoing fee. So of the third, which of these would you say really drives that third? Are these levels, if we drop a zero of all of them for pounds, are they, do they look comparable to what you would expect in the UK market and elsewhere?
So first things first on the hourly fee bit. I think most firms now will quote an hourly fee if they have to for certain work. There are relatively few businesses in the UK that work on hourly fees as a lawyer or an accountant might, but it is a part of lots of practices. In sterling, somewhere between 150 to 250 pounds an hour would be quite common. And then if you need perhaps the absolute kind of head of the business, the most senior person there, they might charge a little bit more than that. So doesn't seem wildly different to here. In terms of fee for a plan, so please just create me a financial plan and then I'll go off and manage my own investments. For those that do that, I would say we're looking between £2,500 and £5,000. It can be more if you need specialist advice around things like defined benefit pensions. Those can get very complicated very quickly. And so the level of complexity will drive what's in there. But the real engine of the 1/3 that we're talking about here is just upfront fees when you take on a new client. In UK market, about between 40 and 45% of firms that respond to our studies will say they only charge asset-based fees. It's a percentage of assets. So the majority now are having some kind of flat fee element, and that comes out a bunch of different ways, right? It could be a minimum fee, it could be a capped fee, actually. So it's 3.5%, but capped at £5,000 or something like that, and that just gets them enough money to get over that hump of taking on the client, and softens the blow a little bit. There are some people who've been around long enough to know that if you have set your business up to work on, let's say, 3% upfront, 3.5% upfront, and somebody walks in through the door and it's the bad time, suddenly your life doesn't look so good. So having those other kind of surrounding mechanisms, some kind of hybridity about it, I think is successful. Advisors who are charging in that way will tend to report that clients are relatively insensitive to ongoing costs because it comes out the portfolio and you don't really notice it, even though it's been quoted openly to you, but they're quite sensitive to upfront. Nonetheless, the amount of behavior that we see of an advisor saying, well, I tell you what, then I'll charge you £1,000 less upfront, but I'll bump your ongoing by 5 basis points, whatever else, is vanishingly small. Doesn't really happen. Okay. Firms tend to have a proposition and stick to it, which is probably healthy, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay, and then let's move on to tech. We said we said at the outset, tech is very much an underpin, would say, of any efficient business in the financial services industry these days. So let's get stuck in, I think. And the first chart I wanted to show was this one. So effectively, this looks across different different segments of the advisor tech world. You can see there's your typical CRM, there's your financial planning or your F&A, platform. I think we can put platform to one side for now. I think we can sort of focus on the rest. But yeah, so, I mean, I'm interested, as you can see here, north of half of the respondents, and effectively, especially if you then say, well, several respondents didn't use certain of these sort of tech segments at all. More than half of the respondents were happy to stick with what they are using, which is interesting to me because I think there's always a narrative I think it's a global narrative around advisor tech, but in South Africa in particular, I think there's always a narrative of advisors wanting requirements that the tools on balance don't provide. So I'm interested in this. How does this compare? And would you have said that South African advisors are more or less satisfied relative to counterparts elsewhere in the world?
I would say slightly more satisfied. And that may just be due to the sunny disposition of South African advisors, I don't know. But certainly, as I said at the start, a cheerier bunch maybe than in some other places. But it's really interesting. So first of all, we love this question because, as researchers, because we give people a magic wand and we say, with no consequences at all, you can have a free choice to use something other than what you use now. And so to see anybody saying, actually, yeah, I will keep using what I'm using now is, first of all, if you're the incumbent, that's quite good, right? So if there's any tool providers or anybody watching this, you must be doing something right somewhere. But when you dig into what's behind this, and when you ask some supplementary questions about your actual satisfaction with the existing system that you use, you start to get a much more nuanced story. So generally speaking, the closer the tool is to the act of giving advice, the more satisfied firms are with it. So generally speaking, you see this in lots of different markets. Cash flow planning systems, so it's Buoyant or Truth, or in the UK is a big one called CashCalc. Intelliflo has one, Iris has one. There's loads of them out there. Pretty green and red bars, and all that kind of stuff. Advisors love them. and are generally pretty happy with the one that they use. They would just pick it again because they come to really value it as an aid to a conversation with a client. So that gets super high scores. So I'm not surprised to see these financial planning tools in there. Risk modelers, things that are a little more kind of abstruse in their nature, a little bit lower. And then we go kind of down and down and down through investment analytics and these kind of, things you've got to do type software till we get to practice management, CRM, back office, that kind of stuff. And then the numbers fall down quite sharply. And that's maybe worth dwelling on just for a second, because the supply of different systems that people can use varies quite dramatically by territory, but we still find that although satisfaction tends to be a lot lower in there, so fewer people would pick it again, satisfaction scores are way, way lower than that would suggest. So I think the last one we did for the UK suggested that 40% or so of firms would pick the same practice management software again. But if you look at the actual kind of scores of how much do you like the thing that you use, whether you would pick it again, is way lower than that. And basically what that tells you is people hate stuff, but they feel stuck with it. So they would just pick it again because it's better the devil you know. And that doesn't feel great. And we do see that all over the place. You're being very good about not talking about platform, and of course this barometer was done with Allan Gray users. You did very well. Allan Gray did extremely well for platform there, so if you're not going to call it out, I will. So that was a thing. But the more kind of workaday, basic, just keeping the lights on the systems are, the lower satisfaction tends to be. This doesn't even get into the kind of more thorny issues, which I think we'll touch on in a moment, about integrations between different systems and all that kind of stuff. Very, very difficult. When you look at a thing like this, here's just a little kind of thing just to get everyone thinking. How many systems, if you're watching this, do you use in your business? And how many potential combinations of those systems are there out there in the market? One of our guys, who really should get out more, he totted it up across all the different versions of all the risk profilers and everything, and all the platforms, all the things advisors could use, and then basically multiplied them all by each other. And there was something like 2.2 million different combinations of systems that advisors could use. And that's a great stat, because you've got, that's your kind of choice architecture. Now build an industry around it, and it's almost impossible. Yeah. So it's no surprise that satisfaction kind of falls off for the grungier end of things.
Yeah, no, makes sense. In our market, what I see at least is you've obviously got advisors who use the local options and they are satisfied with them. They're hopefully the ones that have responded as such there. There's a segment who goes off and builds their own things. It's a small segment, but there is that segment. And then there's also, I think, an increasing segment actually who are looking abroad and saying, we might be able to use some of these. And even though they're not, localized for our context specifically, there's potentially, a lot in them that is usable and valuable, irrespective of region and jurisdiction. Which of those strategies, and there may be more, but which of those strategies would you say is most effective? Can they all work? Are there, where have you seen the real success stories? What are the things that those businesses got right when thinking about how to bring tech into their businesses?
That's a fantastic question, because it's all about mindset. It's all about what do you see inside your business? And if what you see is data moving from one place to another, then you're off to a good start. Because if you view the processes that go around it not as, now I've got to write to this provider to get information or whatever, if you just view it as kind of data packets moving around and work items, and if you can be reductive and kind of process driven in that way, then those other tools start to be useful. And you start to think, well, hang on, there's nothing financial services specific around the fact that work items need to be assigned around my business to the, let's say it's 12 people in my business, 6 administrators. How do I decide which admin is Mark just working with Julie? Does Mark get all of Julie's admin, or how does that work? And there are other ways of looking at it. So of the two you mentioned there, Daniel, I think it's the latter. So just thinking of an example that I happen to know fairly well is a really great firm in Glasgow in Scotland, which is where all the really great firms are, obviously, in Scotland. And they've adopted a workflow system, a kind of business process system called Monday.com. Which has nothing to do with financial services at all. And they've done a lot of work configuring it. They spent some money, right? It's not as expensive as building your own thing, but it's certainly not free. And now their entire business runs off that. They still have to use the industry-specific stuff because we need the integrations for valuations and all that kind of stuff that go with those industry tools. But those industry tools then spit out that information into the system that they want to use. So you start using the industry stuff as a bridge for data and for regulatory reporting and all the kind of very, very grungy stuff that you have to do, fee reconciliations, that kind of stuff. And then the interesting stuff pops out into something in front. And I'm a big fan of that because I love the mindset that it shows. It's saying, right, how can we make this better? We know there are things that we just don't want to build again. Nobody wants to build point-to-point integrations with 50 different providers again. Some people have done that, let them at it. What else can we do now? And that's sort of power to the firm. And, some of the conferences I've been lucky enough to present at in South Africa, what I spend a lot of time talking about is that power now resides with the firm rather than with the provider. The provider doesn't dictate what the experience of the client is. You do as a firm. So you can pick these systems out. You've got to obviously do the work and, get your thinking right and spend the money and whatever it may be. But you can do it. In my experience, Daniel, firms that build their own, generally these guys are frustrated software engineers in the first place. And really, really wish that they'd done something else. Post-university. I've seen an awful lot of firms burn an awful lot of money doing self-build. Almost always, they're solving for a problem that will probably get solved anyway somewhere else by people who've got big development shops, and they're just software companies. I think the idea that a firm now is like an aggregator. It's a point of aggregation for clients and for technologies that help that client experience. That's exciting. If what you really wanted to do was wrap a wet towel around your head and code, go do it. But that's a very different skill set.
Yeah. And I thought
there's probably people screaming at me right now, but it's kind of what we see.
I thought this view was also interesting. So this was surprising to me. So if I think about, a lot of the questions and queries that come along sort of and end up on my desk, it's actually sort of the ones in the middle that I see most of. So obviously the reporting piece, consistent reporting, cross-platform reporting, the investment process, so obviously sort of an integrated advice journey end to end. So I was surprised those weren't at the top. I was surprised that we had, as much as I appreciate that compliance and regulation and automation are all big and important things for all of us, I was surprised to see them at the top of this list. I was also probably a little bit surprised to see online portals right at the bottom of the list, although I suppose 33% is still a big number. So does this look any different elsewhere in the world? Were you as surprised as I was on this one?
I think the responses to questions like this, and we've asked them in various places at various times over the years, it's a point-in-time snapshot. So this tends to suggest that the SA market at the moment is particularly exercised by compliance and regulation. I suspect there's some things moving through at the moment that people are thinking about, or some stuff they've had to worry about. I take it as an indicator of what they're worried about rather than being surprised by it. But I completely take your point. Generally speaking, what we see people care most about is efficiency and accuracy. Those are the kind of things that they're looking for. So yes, that cross-platform reporting and that kind of thing. And the reason for that is that if we were to sit inside advisor businesses, and I'm sure SA is the same, I'm lucky enough to have some pretty amazing chats with South African advisors while I've been down and as part of this. And a lot of what they're talking about in terms of dealing with providers here, there, and everywhere, and offshore stuff, often particularly difficult. The amount of make work that goes into dealing with that is so irritating that they tend to come very high up on these kind of questions about, what would you like technology to do for you one way or the other. Yeah, I might have expected to see those a little bit higher. A lot of the time, to be honest, what we really see advisors saying in 100 different ways, in 100 different forms of asking it, is could the industry, that being the manufacturing part which supports the advice profession, could you just sort yourselves out, please? Could the technology look maybe not like it's 2025, like it's 2015? We take 2015 right now, because big legacy systems constrain lots of development, so and so and so on. So usually it's a bit of a kind of anguished cry for help. I think I see that in here somewhere, and that always comes above the stuff that I think advisors really would rather spend time on, which is, am I giving my client a great online experience? Yeah. And then we get into all the stuff we talked about earlier on about efficiency and all that. So maybe not a surprise, cry for help, maybe a little bit more, and a sign that the industry can always do more to support the profession.
Are there any of these areas where you think tech has done a great job of solving internationally? So which of them do you think tech is being best utilized in?
Oh, wow.
If nothing jumps out, that's fine.
Maybe not massively. I think the ability to bring in valuations from multiple sources in order the systems maybe don't do a great job in bringing them together in an understandable way. It still requires intervention by the advisor to turn that into something a client can relate to. But it's certainly better than having to phone, 10 or 15 different places because you could only hold, this fund there and that fund there and that fund there. So platforms have been a huge part of that. So I think if we could take a theme of aggregation, then I think probably that's been the kind of most notable success. I was doing a conference in the UK a little while ago, and people were having a right old moan about platforms, right? Giving them a bit of stick. And one guy stood up, and I thought it was really interesting. He said, right, I know you all hate, that, and then that bit doesn't work, and that screen's bad, or whatever it might be said, but who wants to go back to a world in which you got to phone, this company for that. Anybody want to go back? And everyone kind of said, no, not really, no. But he was like, right, well, shut up then. Right, we've all got things that we can do better, so let's encourage the platforms to do better. But let's just remember that our lives 25 years ago were a lot less fun than they are right now. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. Good. I'm going to, we're going to touch on AI in the questions. So I'm going to actually skip through the last slide that I had on AI over here, because I do want to allow enough time for questions. And I'm going to start with this one. So this is sort of actually a broader one. So this is moving away a little bit from sort of the themes that we've covered. And what it says is, what are the most recent UK industry trends for us to be aware of? So is there anything else that we haven't covered here that's sort of particularly front of mind for yourself? I suppose in the UK, I'd be interested if there's something globally too, although it wasn't my question.
It wasn't your question. Well, thank you for the question, whoever you are. Probably if there's two big themes, I think the first is consolidation and succession and exit and all the things that go with that. UK advice businesses tend to be run with people at slightly shorter time horizons than South African advisor businesses, just the way the numbers come out. And so that's front of mind for a lot of firms. The consolidation market, the rate of mergers and acquisitions over here is absolutely nuts. And there's smart money and there's some pretty dumb money and all kinds of things going on here. So that's a very fertile thing. If you're interested in the shape of that market, if you drop on the Lancat website, there's some reading there on it. If you go to Citywire in the UK as well, they're very, very good on this stuff. So that's the first one. The second one, Daniel, I think is related to something we have talked about, which is firms starting to rethink what it is that they're there to do. So yes, you're a financial planning business, of course you are, but what you really are is an administration and technology business, if we're honest. Most of the time isn't spent in front of clients. Most of the time is spent doing other things. And so what does it mean to be that? How can we, if we look afresh at our business, how can we combine technologies and what is it we want to do with our time? And that leads firms to do really interesting things. So some may start to think, well, listen, I would like to be an investment manufacturer. I would like to manufacture my own portfolios on a proper discretionary basis, not just off the side of my desk. I want to start a business that looks like that. Great. That's a great thing to do. About 8 or 9% of firms in the UK have discretionary permissions. Most of them don't use them, though they've got them, but some are really starting to push into that space in a coherent way, and that's exciting. Some get into the tech build stuff. Some start to say, well, listen, I really don't want to do any of this stuff. The purpose of me is to give financial planning. And so therefore, I will now compromise lots of things in order to just be able to do that in the most efficient way possible. So for example, instead of picking technology from 6 different vendors, I'll just use what one person does. I'll make the best of it. Because actually, the overall impact that has on my client experience is very low. And I get to spend more time doing the things that I love and that I want my business to do. So that sort of existential question about what is a financial planning business for, what are we here to do today? And there are lots of coherent, credible, appropriate answers to that. It doesn't all have to be the same. A lot of the international guys that talk about financial planning and business consulting kind of guys, they'll tell you there's one way to get at it. And that's wrong and dangerous, actually. There's lots and lots of good different answers to this. And for every single one, there's clients that will fit it. If you want to be investment centric, there are clients who will love that. If you want to be a financial coach and really deprioritize everything to do with investments, so on, there are clients who will love that. So, make those decisions, have those big thoughts. It can be over a glass of wine, or it can be, it's in a structured way. And then now, internationally, I think this is true, you now have the ability, greater than ever before, to start recombining the industry in ways that look like you. And that's so exciting, right? What a time to be a financial advisor, to be able to have that control. You've got the client relationship. Actually, that's the heart of it. Or maybe that might be actually a better answer, is that kind of fundamental understanding that everyone else can take a ticket and wait because me and my client have got stuff to do together. And I'll get to you guys later. And I think that's kind of really lovely consequence of the way the industry's changed.
Here's a question about AI, which is why I skipped over. I saw it coming. So the question is, how are smaller advice businesses in the UK using AI? I'm going to add to that because we didn't touch on AI more broadly. So I'm going to say, are there good examples of bigger businesses with deeper pockets using AI in an effective way?
So take the second part first. The answer is broadly no. And that's because bigger businesses are more risk averse. They've got more skin in the game. And I think they're doing wait and see a little bit more. I don't doubt that individuals within those businesses are using ChatGPT for things or whatever it may be. And that's great. Certainly some of the marketing guff that I see sent out across the sector has definitely been written by AI, and not very well. So, speaking as a guy that writes things for people, sometimes I don't like saying it. I don't do that. Hire proper copywriters, everybody. That's what you want to do. Even ones that aren't us. But we do see lots and lots of firms getting into what we call co-pilots. Some of them are actually Microsoft Copilot, but lots of good use of fairly basic AI tools in order to reduce the drag of boring processes like meeting notes, that kind of stuff. It's quite fun, I think, to be able to put relatively unstructured meeting notes into a tool and have it summarize it back to you. You can have a quick check to check it's okay, and then resave that. I think that that sounds great. Transcription tools as well for when you're doing remote. That's working pretty well now, I think, and that's widespread already. I mean, really, quite fast adoption, I think. And I think, well, we asked the question in SA, and I know you've got the slide, which we might put up in a sec. We saw similar sorts of things in SA, actually, a little bit more wait and see. We are seeing now lots of development of systems which try to reach further into the heart of the advice business and automate suitability and get inside some of the more regulatory processes that are so important to get right. That's a difficult one. The market, I think, here loves the idea of the efficiency, and I can see people trying the tools and quite liking them. But as one of an advisor who I particularly admire says, I'll use stuff to make me more efficient all day long, but see the suitability part, the part that can put me in prison, there's no way. No way am I letting the machines anywhere near that. That's what I have to do. And I think firms are starting to understand what their own lines are, where are they comfortable taking it to or not. Do we get to a point where almost everything can be automated in that way? Maybe. But if the fundamental unit of financial planning is an advisor and client sitting together, whether it's on a screen or in person, that suitability part, which is so important, that may resist AI a little bit longer. But otherwise, great, have at it. Lots of stuff going on.
Okay. Here's one for me, actually. It says, what is Allan Gray's thinking in terms of facilitating different advice fee structures on the platform? Ooh. Unless you want to have a go at it, but
Daniel will build whatever you want.
Okay, well, okay, let me answer it rather. No. So I think for us, that is very much demand led, I would say, as much of what we do when we think about what we prioritize for advisors and their clients. So we would, we have had a few of those questions come through. I'd say maybe they've ticked up a little bit around, advisors asking us, can you deduct a fixed fee monthly rather than asset-based fee from an investment? Or can you tier our advice fees for us similar to how you tier your administration fees? So we've had a few of those questions, but they're still, I'd say, very much the exception to the norm. And I think we see that in the responses around where the fees are currently still being accrued. So I guess it's something we keep an eye on. If there's sufficient demand and ample demand, and we think it's something that really, benefits enough advisors such that it gets to the top of the priority list, then it's something we'd look at. That's where we are there. Here's one on fee structures. So maybe in fact, I'm not going to go there. I think I'm going to come back to this one here, which is on consolidation. You touched on it there. So I'm just seeing if this is different to what you asked, but effectively this is consolidation still taking place at the same rate in the UK market? And what models are most common and successful?
Oh gosh, yes, I think so. The nature of it has changed over the years, but we still see announcements, multiple per week, of firms being bought and sold, and that is over and above the natural kind of flow of people retiring and businesses, transitioning and all the kind of basic stuff that always happens. There's an awful lot of private equity money working its way around our system. And there's lots of views on that. And some people, keener than others. The one thing about private equity is if you understand how private equity works, you can always trust it because you can trust it to be itself and you know exactly what it's trying to do. And if you can get next to that, then great.
Which is what, Mark? Double its money in 5 years? Or what would you say? Is that
Well, I think they'd like to do better than that.
Better than
yes,
that? Okay.
I think that is it, yeah. There's something that can happen. You see it in the States most commonly, where advice businesses get to a certain scale, it's billions of dollars, certainly billions of sterling, I guess tens or hundreds of billions of rand, that some kind of efficiencies do start to come in because it's just so big that you start to be able to hire the kind of people that can really, really go to town. COOs, CTOs, these kind of people. And you can put that kind of world in. So the big wirehouses in the States, the turnkey platforms, all that kind of stuff, they start to get there. And they become very valuable at that point. And you can cross-sell, you can do all kinds of other sorts of things. So everybody's looking for businesses like that in the UK and no doubt in SA and Oz and all the rest of it. So we're seeing these waves of, we call it secondary consolidation, where firms have maybe been bought and smashed together with another firm, and now they're being sold on. We've gone through the first cycle, we're into the second cycle now, and that's starting to get very interesting. I love the question about what's the most successful, because we would need to decide what success means in order to talk about that. From a business point of view, the most successful models are those where the firms being acquired are no longer independent, no longer have control over what platform or investments they use, and no longer have control over the financial planning standards and processes that they use every day. Because the only way this works, certainly for the PE model, is for there to be absolute consistency, and that drives scalability. Otherwise, you get a big old rag bag, and you've just got a very big rag bag instead of a little one. So the most successful from that business point of view look like that. The most successful independent-minded consolidation that I've seen tends to be where firms take the opposite view and don't necessarily have the same urge to build total consistency. They're happy to work with variability, understanding that individual advisors will work better in different ways with different clients and all that kind of stuff. But they'll automate and standardize the stuff that doesn't matter so much. But they will allow advisors a little bit more leeway. I think advisors deal with that a little better. Whenever we ask what's most important to you when you're selling up, and again, goes across markets, people will generally say, I want a decent offer, of course, but they'll also say, I want my clients to be well taken care of. Because fundamentally, we always come back to it. This is a human endeavor. This is an individual talking to another individual. And if you're a local advisor, and most advisors have, clients that they know, or that they can meet at the golf club or the rugby club or wherever it might be, you got to be able to look them in the eye. And that is, that's worth remembering.
Yeah. I think that's a good note to end on, Mark. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with you and the team on the Adviser Barometer, and here's to the next iteration in the not too distant future, hopefully. So thank you, and thank you for your time today. Just in closing, just a reminder on the CPD process. So we are going to be applying for those CPD points, certificates, to be issued and distributed afterwards. And then also after this, as you log off, there'll be a short survey. If you could please just share any feedback which you have with us. So thank you very much to the listeners and to you who've spent the time with us. And goodbye.